This will be This will be number 68.
Oh,
Yeah.
who gets 69?
That's a good question. Maybe Jeff Frost.
Yeah, what's happening?
Yeah. I love having regular guests where you can
Repeat
just
offenders.
catch up. And I just had your partner, Anya.
Oh, are we on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I just had Anya on, and we kind of debated. I was a friendly interlocutor, but skeptical, as I imagine that you are, or I've heard you are as well, to her astrological leanings.
Yeah.
How do you handle that as a kind of rationalist? Or do you?
Well, my position has migrated because I would have, at the beginning, I would say, of interacting with her on the issue, I would say that...
I'm listening. For some reason, it keeps tilting downward. Let's try that instead. It's not a Being in the World podcast without some sound issue at the beginning. Much to some people's annoyance. Anyway.
So I would say that my feeling was, like, this is all bullshit. It's scientifically proven that it's bullshit. And, enough said. And I think that I still feel that way as far as any predictive value.
Yeah.
Right? But I do think, she makes a good point when she says, look, this is one sort of system for investigating the subconscious or investigating patterns in one's life or whatever. It doesn't matter if it's true.
Right.
So it's like dream interpretation, right?
That's what I said.
Yeah. I mean, dreams aren't true.
Neither are novels. Neither are
Right, exactly.
other expressions.
Very
of art.
good point. Yeah. I mean, and some of the greatest expressions of truth and insight come in the form of fiction. So I realized, like, in that one particular part of my life, I was kind of grasping overly hard, I think, at the skeptical perspective, where in other parts of my life, I'm very happy to entertain the insights that I gained from reading The Unbearable Lightness of Being and how that applies to my life. And I've been thinking about it for 30 years. So,
Exactly.
I guess I'm a bit of a hypocrite.
And then she made a good point. I think that we have other stories that we don't even recognize as stories, like, or in ideologies like capitalism, that we then has like structures our values in our lives. And that's as much of a fiction in so far as.
Yeah. I mean, it's all narratives.
Exactly.
I mean, the thing about astrology, I think that took us some time to hash out is that she doesn't approach it as you're a Scorpio, therefore you're like this.
Right. Exactly.
Right. It's much more subtle and sort of complex. And the complexity is a release from that sort of A equals B, so therefore B must equal C kind of thinking. But, as astrology is understood in the popular consciousness, I think that is bullshit.
Yeah, agreed.
You were born in February, therefore you're like this. Fuck off. I mean, come on. Or Chinese astrology, like, oh, you were born in 1962. You're a tiger. Okay, everyone from 1962 is a fucking tiger. Come on.
All right. Well, we've beaten a dead horse there. Let's move on to.
Speaking of dead horses, you got a antique. Can people see this? I don't
Yeah,
know what
people
you're
who are watching.
framing.
I just found this horseshoe as we were walking over here, and since we were talking about superstition and astrology, I thought it was interesting to just like stumble on a horseshoe on my property. And there used to be horses here, but decades ago. So there's this old horseshoe here. But my dad used to say, I'd ask him if it was true that he was superstitious, because he would always act superstitious. He'd say, no, it's bad luck to be superstitious. And I always think that, like, oh, you can kind of, if you fear something bad's going to happen, I do think you can help bring it on.
Yeah,
And if you think something
no
good's
doubt.
going to happen, that's going to have an influence on whether that said good thing happens or not.
Yeah, and is that even superstition? If you're really nervous about, doctors say there's a Cancer personality.
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that.
Like someone who's very like neurotic and fearful and expecting the worst. That, you know, there's not ironclad research into this, but certainly stress weakens the immune system. The immune system regulates mutating cells. If the immune system is overworked, overwhelmed, it's going to be less efficient at eliminating those mutating cells, you know. Or on a more pedestrian level, if you're afraid of dogs, you're more likely to be harassed by dogs,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If you're riding a horse and you're confident, the horse feels that. If
Yeah.
you're not confident, it feels that. So you're more likely to get bucked. I mean, we don't need to look to karma or, you know, the cosmos to see how these sorts of things come around.
Yeah, yeah. So where have you been for the last year since you've been traveling
Where have
like
you been all my
crazy?
life? Yeah, we went. Well, basically, what happened was we were thinking of building this house in Colorado, but the world just went crazy with COVID and building costs, and you know, lumber went up 4 times its previous price, and contractors were booked out. So we just said, well, okay, look, if we're going to build a house, we're going to be kind of stable at some point. But now's not the time to do it. So and I'm turning 60, so let's do a last kind of like global world tour. And I'm sure we'll keep traveling.
Did you turn 60 already?
Yeah, this year.
What was your birthday?
February.
I'm not trying to figure anything out about.
I'm an Aquarius. Yeah, so we decided let's just travel, and neither one of us had any kind of work that was location specific. So first we went to Guatemala for a couple of months. That was like September, October, I think. Then we came back. I had to do a talk in Vegas
What was the talk about?
about psychedelics at the Meet Delic conference. I would normally never agree to give a talk about psychedelics in Las Vegas. But they had planned the conference before COVID in LA when I was living in LA. And they offered me a few $1,000s to come and give a talk. And I was like,
Are you a psychedelic expert?
yeah,
I
sort
didn't know
of.
this.
Yeah, I used to be. Before I got into sexuality, psychedelics was my thing. And I've met personally lots of people in that world, from, Albert Hoffman to, not directly. Stanley Krippner, who was my mentor in grad school, knew Timothy Leary and Aldous Huxley and Alan Watts and, all those people, the Grateful Dead and all that. And I've used psychedelics educationally since I was, 18 was the first time. And it was they were an important part of my education, I would say. And so I was into the sort of ethnobotany aspect of them, how different people around the world use medicinal plants, and also I was very interested in the sort of critique of Western civilization that arose from the use of psychedelics. So that's informed a lot of my stuff.
And is the through line, I imagine there's a lot of through lines between the psychedelics and the sexuality, but of course the most obvious is that they're both taboo. But the reason for their tabooness, I wonder, what is there a commonality there?
Yeah, I think, the radical transformative potential of psychedelics is that they, and I think this is also the reason they've been so penalized and demonized throughout Western history, is that they offer a window to see outside of the dominant paradigm.
Good. I
Right.
like that, yeah.
So a lot of people have the experience of tripping for the first time and realizing, like, oh my God, there's so much going on that I ignore. There's so much beauty that I just walk right past. There's so much complexity and nuance and it's not like other kinds of intoxication where you have perceptions that then when you return to a normal state of consciousness evaporate. The beauty of psychedelics, in my experience, is that you have insights that stick with you the rest of your life. And the main one is what I've been told is real is just a story and it's not necessarily true. And there are ways to investigate that and see beyond the matrix, right? And I think it's the same with sexuality. I think sexuality offers an ability to, or a window into aspects of our consciousness and the intimacy that can form between people that society would tell you is impossible or forbidden or will kill you or will destroy your relationship or whatever. But then you actually go there and it's like, wow, this is actually easy and kind of feels appropriate. Like,
Yeah.
wow, the story I've been told is bullshit.
And there is an element that these things also feel good and can be escapist and can be hedonistic. And to what degree are they? Is that a feature versus it being a bug? In
Well, what are you escaping from, right? So you say escapist. I think that when used respectfully and consciously, both of them may offer an escape from tedium and normalcy, but it's like you're escaping a really bad party into a really good party, So yeah, there's movement. Anyway, that's how I ended up in Vegas doing that thing. And it was just fucking weird. And I didn't mention, because they originally planned it in LA. That's when I agreed to do it, because I thought I'll drive down, I'll give a talk, drive home. It's easy money. But then COVID hit and they ended up rescheduling it and holding it in Vegas. And so, because I had already agreed, it's like, okay, I'm going to Vegas. I've only actually been to Vegas twice. And both times I was paid to go there. I wouldn't go to Vegas if I wasn't. You'd have to pay me to go to Vegas, literally.
literally.
The first time was right after I finished my doctoral dissertation, which was on human sexual behavior in the Pleistocene, which later became Sex at Dawn. I got this email a couple months after I got my PhD from a professor saying, hey, Dr. So-and-so gave me a copy of your dissertation and it's really fascinating. And I'd love to invite you to a conference to present your research. And it's like, this is every grad student's wet dream, someone actually read my dissertation, like, holy shit. And it turned out that it was the largest swingers convention in the world being held in Vegas, called the Lifestyle Convention. So I got invited to present my research at the Lifestyle, and I show up with my PowerPoint presentation. And I remember the room, I was giving it my talk the same time as two other people. And on one side, it was how to manage your three-way relationship. And the other one on the other side was fisting for fun and pleasure.
Amazing.
Or you could go here, Dr. Ryan, talk about sex and prehistory. So yeah, that was my first time in Vegas. There were 3,000 couples registered at this thing. Amazing. In one hotel on the Strip. I forget which one it was, but massive hotel. 3 plus walk-ins. So there were, literally 8,000 people there. Like,
Did you get to play?
we went to a couple of parties. Yeah. It was, I find, I'm going to sound like such a shithead saying this, but I feel like Americans can take the fun out of anything, including sex. So it was the first time I'd ever been to a sex party in America, was this thing. And it was just like, I lived in Spain, Latin country, a much more kind of fluid relationship with these things. America, there's like bouncers and there's somebody at the door with a clipboard and like taking names and I want to see your ID and okay, this is a play to stay party. You can't just like stand around and not do anything. You got to fuck to stay. It's like, Jesus Christ, this is so unsexy. Yeah. So I just sort of approached it from an anthropological point of view,
Yeah, and the whole swinger lifestyle, quote unquote, it's got this real kind of Republican bent in the sense that it's very, insofar as like a progressive point of worldview aims to like dissolve boundaries. And I think that the more conservative, it's like about erecting, no pun intended, boundaries and hierarchies. And I think that somehow the swingers have managed to uh, maintain and even reinforce boundaries and hierarchies within that lifestyle. And that's probably unconsciously or consciously what we're resistant to. Like, you can only have, sex when your partner's there and no feelings have to be involved, and
Right.
it's all very safe and kind of
Yeah.
within a kind of very well defined container.
Yeah. Although
And all these things you describe seem to have that.
yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. Although, to be fair, I think those sorts of rules are probably important for people who are getting into that realm for the first time, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
if there isn't a clear, like for example, in any swinger space, no means no is the first rule at the
Yeah.
door, right? And everyone gets that. Like, hey, if you touch someone, you don't touch someone without asking. And if you ask and they say no, well, that's it. End of discussion, right? No whining, no cajoling. Those sorts of things. And, condoms are obligatory, and there's this and there's that. I feel like that's pretty important.
Well, some boundaries are important. Those are all literal boundaries,
Yeah,
right? A
yeah.
condom's a barricade. A
Literally,
no
yeah.
is a no. Like,
Yeah.
these are exactly. Although a friend of mine was at a sex party in New York recently, and they had a whole like 20-minute talk to everyone about consent at the beginning, and this woman, like 40-year-old woman, just stood up at the end of it and just said, "I just want to say in advance that I consent to everything."
Right. Right. What's that called? Consensual non-consent. It's like, I'm going to pretend I don't want it, but I do. So ignore me when I say no. It's like,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, this shit gets complicated. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's my hang up. I don't know how you feel about this, but there's just something about American rules and regulations and like,
It's that Germanic kind of puritanical side of our culture. It's
yeah.
just, yeah, it's a
Do you
thing.
feel American? Are you more American than Italian or Spanish or like,
I feel more American when I'm in Italy and more Italian when I'm here.
right. Yeah.
So I've always like, I think part of what's attracted me to all these issues is a certain sense of being an outsider, and an acceptance of that and an exploration of those liminal spaces.
Can I use your phone to take a picture of you? Because the background right now is amazing. It looks like you're
I don't
like
know if it'll pick up both,
like
unfortunately.
on a movie
There's
set.
not quite enough of
Yeah,
a
it's
range.
exposing to the. Oh, and there's the cat too. It's really nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then we were in Guatemala, came back to do that, and then we went to Southeast Asia. We were in Thailand for a few months, and that was COVID. There were lots of restrictions, so we had to like fill out all these forms and get tested and do this and do that. But it was really interesting to be in Thailand with maybe 5% of normal tourism volume.
Oh, wow.
It was just empty. Like we went to Phuket because there's a dentist there, and Anya had to get some wisdom teeth pulled. And we went on to the main beach in Phuket, which is normally just disgusting.
Yeah.
There's no one there. No one. It was amazing. You're like one woman all the way a mile down the beach. You could
Really?
see, and it was just the water was clean. Yeah, so we took advantage of that and traveled to places that I had first gone to in like '89, the first time I was in Thailand. Krabi and some other Koh Phangan. And, I wouldn't go there normally because it's just overrun. But now, during this trip, it was empty. It was really interesting. It's kind of post-apocalyptic a little bit.
I was born in Thailand. That's why I've always had this interesting relationship to it. Because I haven't spent a lot of time there, but obviously having, and my father loved it. And of course, a lot of people associate Thailand with a certain commodification of an exploitation of sexuality, but also a certain freedom. What's your take on the Thai culture's relationship to sex?
It's a strange thing because obviously I'm very interested in cultural relationship to sexuality, and I love Thailand. I've been there many times, but I've never engaged with it personally. Like I've never been with a Thai woman. I have no moral or ethical issue with people, obviously adults doing what they want to do with their sexuality and their bodies. But it's really hard for me to engage with someone sexually if I'm not sure that she actually wants to be engaging with
Same,
me. It's such a turnoff to
same.
feel like she's the least bit reluctant. I feel so ugly,
Yeah.
and so I don't want to. I don't want to go there. I don't know how to go there. So I've never really like engaged. I taught English to prostitutes in Bangkok for maybe a month way back when I was in Bangkok waiting for my girlfriend to come and travel with me. And I remember telling a
So
British
they
guy,
paid you.
they paid me to like, yeah, help them negotiate
It's a
prices.
good flipping of the of the
Yeah,
script
yeah.
too.
But anyway, yeah, I'm in favor of it. Although there is the whole bar girl, like, hey, come here, yeah, scene that just seems ridiculous. But I don't know. A lot of those guys, like, maybe that's all that's available. You
Yeah, I mean,
know?
I'm against it only insofar as I'm against commodifying everything.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah,
think it's just as exploitative, and we should question even more the giving someone a soulless job, like having to sell their body, flipping burgers at McDonald's.
right.
And it points to this puritanism to say like, but I mean, you could also argue that it points to the fact that even in the most capitalist society, we do hold some things sacred and say that you shouldn't sell that thing.
Yeah,
But
but whose right is that to determine that?
right,
Like George Carlin said, you can. What did he say? It was like about you can't sell sex. You can have sex, but you can't sell sex. You can give it away, but you can't sell it. Like that doesn't make any sense. And how is it that the society is telling women, generally young women who may have no other means of gaining income other than to go to a fucking sweatshop or something, like you can't do that. Come on, it's like anti-unionization or something.
yeah,
It seems totally unfair and targeted. But
it
I
just
agree with you. Anytime someone's criticizing or condemning some kind of sex work, my first question is, okay, how do you feel about this person doing other exploitative work, working in an Amazon warehouse, right? Like for a third of the money or a tenth of the money. Like, why is that okay? Because of the sex? That's just puritanical bullshit.
I agree. I agree. So how long did you spend in Thailand?
Probably 3 months in Thailand. Then we went to
And is what structures your days and your weeks when you're on these travels? Is it mainly your podcast? Are you writing? Are you?
yeah, a little writing, a little podcasting. I try to keep the podcast going at one a week.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just releasing them. I record them in batches, as you do. You're recording 2 or 3 today, and you'll release them over time. And so that's how I do it as well. When the opportunity's there, I take it. We have a friend who lives in Thailand on one of the islands down south. I've been going to visit him. He's been living there for 15 years or so. So we normally, I'll go to that island and hang out there with him and just chill and do some writing and reading and, just relaxing. Yeah. So anyway, we were in Thailand for a few months, and then it was starting to get hot. We went to Turkey. I'd never been to Turkey before.
Istanbul?
Flew into Istanbul and then went to oh shit, what's it called now? It's on the turquoise coast. Beautiful little fishing village.
Was it Bodrum or no?
South of Bodrum, smaller than Bodrum. I forget what it's called. Anyway, we were there for about a month. The water was really cold. It was March. It was too early, really. And the war had started in Ukraine, so a lot of weird stuff happening with Russians. Like Russian tourism was way down, and normally it's an important part of that economy. But there were a lot of refugees coming in, and people who were tourists and finding out their credit cards weren't working anymore. It was like a lot of chaos. So anyway, we're there for about a month, and then we went to Georgia and Tanzania. We were in Tanzania for a couple of months.
Wait, what was
And
Georgia like at this time? Speaking of Russia and the war.
Georgia's interesting. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd heard from a lot of sort of digital nomad people that Georgia was a good place to go because you land there, they give you 1 year visa, free. You're welcome. Like, come on in, and the sort of value to cost ratio is really good. The food's good. The people are nice. A lot of people spoke English. And the mountain, the Caucasus are gorgeous. We didn't travel around as much as we'd like to have because Anya got COVID for the last like 10 days we were there, which is when we were going to go do some traveling. So we'll probably go back. We were in Spain for a couple of months out in the Canaries and
So do you consider
saw
yourself
your mom.
do you consider yourself a digital nomad?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I make a living with my laptop. So
And how do you reconcile your kind of anti-modernity and your love of your kind of leaning on or the kind of possibilities that the digitality allows?
I don't really see any issue. I don't feel like I need to reconcile the different parts of my life. I live in the modern world. I use the tools of the modern world. When people say like, "Oh, you don't like modernity, why don't you go hunt and gather?" Like, I don't think that's a legitimate conversation to enter into.
I'm just thinking of like Terrence McKenna said that he was also kind of skeptical of a lot of the boundaries that civilization put up, and the loss of touch with some essential parts of our humanity. But he also saw the kind of that there was some common cause between psychedelics and technology in the sense that they were both boundary dissolving, had kind of boundary dissolving tendencies. And I remember hearing this talk of his in like 1995 saying, in the future, we'll be using the internet to like find our old friends. And, he kind of predicted like social media.
And stalk them.
Well, the problem was that, there was this like initial excitement and there was this thought that it was going to be this decentralized boundary dissolving thing. But then somehow all of that promise got co-opted by these new monopolists. And
Are they new, or is it the old boss? Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
it's even more consolidated in a way.
Yeah.
They have even more power. I mean, I think that Zuckerberg has more money than Rupert Murdoch, right? So,
But he's such a loser. He's such a sad little boy.
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a strange world. But anyway, I don't feel like there needs to be any reconciliation. It's like, you're complaining about air pollution, and so you shouldn't breathe air. That doesn't make sense. You can critique things and still participate in them.
Do you think that there's a kind of way to keep the good of the technology without this like concentration of wealth and like how much of this, we're recording this. I'm going to put it on YouTube. I'm going to put it on Spotify. These centralized things. Like I always wish there was a Wikipedia version of social media. I don't understand why there's not like a wiki Twitter. Maybe it just costs too much money. It doesn't seem like it would cost too much money to have like this stuff on decentralized platforms that don't depend on ads, that depend on donations.
Yeah, but then what do you do with policing it and keeping it a decent space and not have it turn into, another one of these hate-filled Reddit subreddits, or whatever the other ones are called that they keep shutting down.
So you think
4chan or whatever.
We need hierarchy in this domain?
I don't know. I think the problem with that sort of technology is a problem that's endemic to large-scale civilization, right? Which is that we're dealing with people we don't know face to face. And so the sort of innate pro-social behavior patterns that have been inculcated in us over hundreds of thousands of years dissolve or don't apply, and so we say things to people that we would never say if they were sitting across the table, and so you end up with all this ugliness and anxiety and stress and hate and conflict, where on a small scale that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Because in hunter-gatherer society, if I insult you, even if I'm bigger and stronger and higher in some kind of hierarchy, you're armed. We're all armed. We're all deadly,
Yeah.
right? And so if shit gets really out of hand, I don't care who you are, you're going to get an arrow in the back. So, we've learned over a long time, many generations, to sort of operate from a place of respect and caution, and
Yeah.
but online it doesn't happen, and it also doesn't happen in big cities. It doesn't, where you can insult someone and walk away and never see them again, right?
Yeah.
Or in governing large societies, like Stalin said, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. Well, that's because he's thinking the one death, I see this, I know this person, I saw them die.
Well, this podcast is called Being in the World after my friend and mentor at UC Berkeley, Bert Dreyfus. He was an interpreter of Heidegger, but so specific to his interpretation that people jokingly called it Dreidegger. And Heidegger wrote a book called Being in Time, and Dreyfus wrote a book called Being in the World, which was like his interpretation of being in time, or his manual to helping understand it. But one of the central tenets is the importance of having a body and being in a specific time and place, and all the consequences that come with that you're talking about. Risk, like that what you're talking about is your words mattering, right? If your words have consequence,
Right.
then that and according to Dreyfus and Heidegger, the whole ability for things to matter is to have a body engaged in the world in a way that is distinct from having a different body in a different world. And when we talk about world, I don't mean the earth. I mean like the world of podcasting, or the world of jazz, or the world of flamenco, or the world of carpentry. So if you have a certain set of local practices give birth to meaningful differences between me and you, because you play a certain instrument and I play another instrument, and what we get together on a Tuesday, and so Tuesdays matter because that's the day that we get to play music, and the room we play in matters because it has the great acoustics, and your specific style of playing that instrument coalesces with mine. And if I make a mistake, I go home and feel bad about it. And that leads to greater and greater skillfulness, and the skillful you are, the more meaningful differences you're able to distinguish that someone who doesn't have that skill isn't able to see, right? So even if we play chess, for example, somebody might come over and not know how to play, so they might just see a bunch of wooden pieces in the checkered board, and then you see the rules, and all of a sudden, oh, you see that's a pawn and that's a bishop, and those are different and they have different powers, and then you get even better and you can say, wow, the queen is very impotent in that position. And that's not a subjective opinion. That's the truth. But the only way you're going to have access to that truth is to be enmeshed in these practices.
Right.
And if you make a move and you make a mistake, it has the consequences of you look bad and your whole identity as a chess player is kind of destroyed. Whereas now, like I've had to stop playing chess online because no game matters.
Right.
There's just the next game, and there's an infinite number of games available, and it's just leads
right.
to a very empty existence. And if I insult you, and then I'll just you say something back, I just delete you and go talk to the next person, and so it just everything becomes replaceable because everything is not localized anymore.
And isn't that a byproduct of technology, right?
Exactly.
Where you can stamp out 1 million TV dinners, they all suck. The nutritional content is nothing, but you've got all you want, and they're cheap, and they're quick, and they're efficient, and
McDonald's tastes the same in Rome as it does
Right.
in LA as it does in
Right.
Mongolia.
So that's the problem. I agree with you that technology, and using the word technology to signify one thing, I think is problematic, right? Because there's, podcasting equipment versus vaccines versus FedEx. I mean, they're not all the same thing. But I do feel like there's a tendency, because technology, the way it enmeshes and interacts with capitalism, favors efficiency over quality, right? And volume over creativity or uniqueness or something. I feel like that we live in the world of technology. It used to be we invented technology and it assisted us in certain things. It's almost like we had, hunter-gatherers have hunting dogs. And it's almost like the dogs grew and replicated, and now we live in the dog's world,
Right. Now,
And
Heidegger
so
called it the technological understanding of being.
there it is,
And
right?
and what the worst, the most nefarious part is that then it even applies to the way we look at ourselves. So all of a sudden, not only are we optimizing every resource to be most efficient, we're even seeing ourselves as resources.
Well,
And we
look at all
talk
the
about
fucking
being
hacking, body hacking.
Yeah.
Hack your morning. Take these supplements and do this morning routine, and your abs, and take this. Drink this shit. It's like fuck. I'm not a machine.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a machine.
Yeah.
And this is a body. It'll never be perfect.
Yeah.
It's the nature of bodies not to be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, Heidegger never saw Tinder, right? And dating apps where you swipe, 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 swipe.
It's so amazing. He talked
the
about
app
the stuff
sucks?
versus, he talked about the stuff about radio and television, saying
Yeah.
that it makes everything seem close, but actually everything is equally far away from us.
Right.
And then when you have, if closeness and farness no longer are different, then what is the meaning of closeness anymore?
Right.
And so if you obviate those meaningful differences, you end up with nihilism, right?
And that's the thing I love about podcasting. One of the things I love about podcasting. You and I are sitting here right now. Neither one of us is looking at our fucking phones. Neither one of us is elsewhere.
That's beautiful.
And it's really hard. It's really hard in this world to be here in a room with someone for an hour or whatever it is. When do you do that?
That's why I love it too. That's what Dreyfus would talk about, using technology against itself. And so if you have a record player whose whole purpose is to make you not have to learn to play music and to just sit there passively as a consumer of whatever music, and it doesn't matter if you get bored with this one. I mean, obviously it's times 10 with the iPod, or the phone, but even already with the record player, you would never just switch off somebody playing jazz in front of you, right? But if you just get bored of this thing, you turn on the next thing. But no way the guy who invented the record player could have predicted the DJ learning to engage with his body and skillfully with two record players and scratching, and photography was probably invented so that you didn't have to sit and learn how to paint, and you wouldn't have that meaningful several days of sitting with somebody and learning and painting their portrait. Now you could just click a button, and the poor painter was sad he was out of a job and nobody was doing anymore. Yeah. But nobody would have dreamed that someone would take photography and turn it into high art. And
photography was invented so we could look at pussies. Seriously.
Probably, yeah. Let's bring it back to sex.
There's a book called The Erotic Engine, a really interesting book that argues that every advance in representative technology has been funded by porn.
Really?
Yeah, including photography. The first photograph was famously of the horse with all his feet off the ground to settle a bet, I think, something like that, or one of the first photographs. But if you read this book, he makes a really compelling case, I forget the author's name, that all the sort of funding, the money coming to work out the film and get the focus right and figure out all this stuff was people who just wanted to look at naked women. And then the same thing with obviously home video and Polaroid and all this stuff. Internet. First people who were figuring out how to charge money on the internet, process it and not get defrauded and, work with banks or credit card companies. That was all porn.
Amazing.
And it's still one of probably the biggest industry on the internet.
And what is that? Does that just say we just have really strong sex drives and it guides a bunch of our behavior?
Yeah, I think so. And it's repressed. And so, as everyone from Freud on would tell you, when you repress basic human drive, it just comes out in another way. You're never going to stop it. It's like the mushroom growing through the asphalt.
And so is one of your main overarching missions in your work to try and point out that repression and therefore make it less strong? Or
Well, I don't know about changing the level of repression. I think if I could point to a motivation in the two books that I've managed to write, in both cases, it's to minimize or lessen unnecessary suffering. So I hope that people who read either one of my books often come
Sex
to
at
the
Dawn and Civilized to Death.
Sex at Dawn and Civilized to Death will come to the realization that, like, oh, this isn't my fault, right? It's not my fault I think about sex a lot. It's not my fault that I really love my husband, but I'd love to have something with another guy, but I feel like so dirty and horrible for feeling that way, or I cheated on my wife, and I'm not excusing cheating. I'm just saying that the hunger for novelty in eroticism is totally predictable and built into our species. And so, far from being ashamed of it and beating ourselves up over it or beating each other up over it or divorcing someone that you've built a life with because she fucked her tennis teacher, like, let's calm down and start from an understanding of what kind of animal human beings are and then work from there. And the same thing with Civilized to Death, which is so many people are so unhappy. Suicide rates are up, depression is up, self-harming is up, like all this stuff is just going up and up and up. People are deeply unhappy, but they're being told you live in the best time in the world. You live in the best time in the history of humanity. You're so lucky. Well, if I'm so lucky, why am I so unhappy? And so that's the question that Civilized to Death seeks to answer. And the question, I guess, that Sex at Dawn seeks to answer is, if I love my partner, why am I attracted to other people? And in
But
both
of course, I
cases,
think
it's not your flaw, is my point.
so. I guess the conservative response to that would be like, you're absolving people of responsibility when maybe being responsible is what distinguishes us. What brings us to the highest place maybe is to assume responsibility and then maybe resist some of these impulses in order to move, to a higher, more
Sure,
evolved
and you'll
place, let's say.
sure, and you'll be able to resist them more effectively if you understand where they come from and why they take the shape that they do in your consciousness. I've said often that monogamy, for example, is like vegetarianism, right? You can decide to be a vegetarian, and that can be a really good decision for you. It could agree with your constitution. There are ethical questions concerning the treatment of animals that would lead you to this, right? That maybe you've got a cholesterol issue and there's that. I mean, whatever. There are many reasons to decide to be a vegetarian, but just because you've decided to be a vegetarian doesn't mean that bacon suddenly stops smelling good, right? And there's a reason bacon smells good. There's a reason barbecued meat smells good. It's because your ancestors have been eating that for hundreds of thousands of years. Your body is designed to crave that. So again, there's nothing wrong with being a vegetarian, and it's not absolving anyone of responsibility. I think what it's doing is just giving a more accurate picture of the situation. And it makes no sense to tell children not to be able to play outside, right? Why do they want to play outside? Because human children have played in trees and climbing and since before we were human, right? So these appetites come from a place very deep in us. And I agree that we need to be careful about how we express them in a world that in some ways is hostile toward them, or where their expression could be inappropriate, no question. But we're going to be able to control them more effectively if we understand them and if discussing them is acceptable. And unfortunately, in our world, even discussing a lot of these things is unacceptable.
Well, I do envy your. I do think you might not have become a hunter gatherer, but you are committed to this kind of more nomadic lifestyle, and I do envy it a lot of the time. I wish I could just like I've tended to plant roots almost like despite myself, and I fantasize about.
Yeah, but you have like your place is awesome because people come through here.
Yeah,
So it's almost like you travel without moving,
this is true. This is
and
true.
that's awesome. I would love to be able to do that. So I don't know that I'm committed to it. I feel like it just, like I can't get it together to do something more permanent, and I'm getting to the stage of my life where it's like, well, why bother at this point?
I remember your gifts that you would bring every time you'd come here always had this through line that I don't think you said wasn't intentional, but I remember you brought me these little solar lights that you could use when camping and around the property here. And then the next time you brought me these beautiful binoculars. And then the time after that, you brought me like a vial of microdosing LSD.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. It was fake. And I was like, oh my God, every gift is a way of like illuminating the world and seeing the world a little more clearly. Oh, and then the next time was like a few copies of your book. And it was the next book. And I found all of these gifts had this
Espresso
in
pods.
common. I don't think you ever brought me espresso pods.
Oh,
did
I
you?
ordered tons of them. I send them to you from Amazon.
Awesome. I was wondering where those came from. But okay, so that doesn't fit the through line here. But the ones you've brought me in person have been ways of literally like expanding or focusing in on a different way of seeing the world. And I do think hopefully allowing one to be more comfortable in it, even if there's a little discomfort maybe in the process. I think of letting go of some of those boundaries, or of like looking at things more clearly. Is there another book in the works that's going to follow this through line
Follow the through
of
line.
your life kind of mission of
Yeah, well,
helping
there's
ease
one.
suffering?
Yeah, there's one I've been thinking about for years that definitely would fit into that trajectory. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get to it though. We'll see. It's sort of a self-help book that makes fun of self-help books. So it's there's a balancing
Meta.
act there. So I've been thinking about that and sort of gathering research for that. And then what I'm really interested in right now, though, and I feel sort of more drawn to, is a novel set in prehistory. Because I've got all this knowledge about how people lived in prehistory. And I've never written fiction. So I'm kind of
Fun.
drawn to give that a go. Because the thing is, the books I've written are like, they're like doctoral dissertations or something. They're big research based arguments, and the sort of thesis when you write a book like that is everyone else is wrong. Let me show you what's right. And I just feel like on an ego level, I'm just done with that. Like I don't have the fire in the belly or whatever it is to go out and argue and, write reposts to Steven Pinker's latest essay in the New York Times Review of Books, or, like just engage in that public debate. My editor at one point, I remember we were talking about stuff and he's like, what are you going to do next? And and I was like, I don't know, man. I think I'm just going to take some time and, just go fuck around and relax. And I don't know if I'll do something. And he's like, and he was dumbfounded. He's like, but but you're in the door, right? You're in the door. Like, why would you not take advantage of this? And I remember he looked at me like uncomprehendingly and he said, don't you want your voice to be part of the public debate? And I was like, no, I don't really give a shit.
Yeah.
Like, I've never had ambition. I've never, I like it. I like the fact that I've written a couple of books and that people are touched by them. And when they meet me, they're like, oh, you wrote Sex at Dawn. Fuck, dude, I love that book. I mean, I really enjoy that, having something special that I've done. But I kind of feel like I've done it.
It's so interesting because, like in Italy, I remember my father often say, not often, but occasionally you'd meet somebody and I'd be excited about them. And I'd say, what do you think of this person? And he'd say, oh, yeah, they're interesting and nice, but a little bit ambitious. And ambitious was only used pejoratively.
Right.
And in
Right.
America, it's only used as a term of obvious, admiration
Yeah.
and something you would want. And I think I'm like literally on the fence on that one. And I think that it's interesting to be able to take a word like that and see both of its positive and negative valences, not unquestionably attack somebody just because they want to do something. But what was implied in my father's critique is like, oh, they're gonna step on people to get what they want.
Right.
They're gonna have self-interest as their first driving motivator, and therefore you can't really trust somebody who's ambitious. Therefore, like
Yeah.
you can't really engage in a way because they're always thinking about what they want to do,
Right.
instead of being present. So I think I definitely can relate to the idea of just like, okay, you've done something. I've made a couple of movies. I don't think like I've got to make another one. It's got to be more successful than the last one. It's like, no, I'm proud of that, and I'm also into relaxing and having conversations like this,
Right.
and being able to be in the desert, and we
Yeah.
we shouldn't pursue those things unquestioningly.
No,
If there's something you
nothing.
can't imagine not saying, like this has to be said, it will flow out of you. I
Right.
think in some medium.
And that's how both of the books that I've written were that. They were examples of that. Like I needed to say that. I
Yeah.
felt like I knew something that would help people if they could hear it.
Yeah.
Not everyone, but some people. And also the word ambition is interesting because you can be ambitious to be happy, to be loved, to have friends, who love you. I mean, those are ambitions. Those are things that we have an appetite for that I think are really healthy. The problem is, the American expression of ambition is power, fame, money, more, more, more.
Yeah.
And they're actually proud, like, I never have enough. I'm always going for more, I got to get more. Yeah, it's a sickness. There's a story I heard a couple weeks ago, and I think it's a story that's gone around because someone I told it to was like, yeah, I heard that. But it was about Joseph Heller was at a dinner party at some billionaire's house, and the billionaire got a call, and there was some deal he was in the middle of, and he went to the other room to deal with it. And somebody at the table said to Joseph Heller, does it ever blow your mind that he's probably making more money on this deal than you made in all the books you've ever written? And he said, yeah, but I have something he'll never have. I said, yeah, what's that? Enough.
Yeah. Great.
Right. And I feel like that's a really deep lesson. And, I read Henry David Thoreau Walden when I was 16 or 17. And I remember a line in that where he says, a man's wealth is measured by the things he doesn't need.
Yeah.
And it's
I think there's a
so
Neapolitan
true.
expression. It's like to be rich is to have enough money to live as you do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and the Stoics, right? I mean, they were talking about this stuff thousands of years ago. So yeah, I think, and that getting back to the original topic of conversation, I think psychedelics did a lot to help me see those sorts of truths, right? That those things are illusions, wealth and fame and power, it's all illusions. So, focus on what's real. What's real is love and friendship and kindness and wealth of experience. No one can take that away from you.
Do you think podcasting depends on thinking that your voice has a value? Is there a certain presumption there that, or I wonder about this because I just kind of do it instinctively now, or always did, and
Yeah.
I wonder if there's like a certain like arrogance to that.
Well, I think it depends on how you do the podcast, right? Like both of us do podcasts with guests primarily. And so a lot of the value can be to just be a good curator of guests and have the humility to get out of the way and let them talk, which, when I look back, I've done 500 and some episodes
That's amazing.
now. Yeah, I've been doing it for over a decade. And when I think about, I never go back and listen to old episodes. I probably should, maybe. I don't know. But I think one of the things I struggled with was letting the other person tell their story and not be like, oh, that reminds me of this great story when I was in Thailand.
Yeah.
And so I set aside special episodes called Roma, ranting out my ass, where it's like, okay, I'm going to stop interrupting guests to tell my story. And I'll just do these where I'll tell my story and not, step on anyone else. I think that was a good innovation for me. But yeah, I mean, I'm always confused. And I say this to people in person. I say this on the podcast all the time. I don't really know why people listen to my podcast. I appreciate it. I'm really grateful. And it's awesome that there's people in fucking Western Australia listening to my podcast while they're hiking in the mountains. And, I get emails from all over the world and it's fucking amazing. But I have to think it's just like there's a dearth of older male role models in people's lives. And I hear this a lot. Like my uncles are all fucking alcoholic idiots. And, I was never close with my dad. And so there's no like older man in my life who talks in a way that makes sense to me and who's lived his life in a way that I legitimately get it,
Nice.
And so I think whatever popularity my podcast has is probably mostly due to that. Like I'm the cool uncle who's taken acid and had lots of sex and been around the world. And so when I, give some advice or say something about, how to treat women, they're like, well, this guy's gotten laid a lot, so he probably knows what he's talking about more than my fucking Fox News watching uncle.
That's
So,
hilarious. No, I do think it's a case of using technology against itself. It's resisting the trend towards always more speed, more superficiality,
Right.
more, just click to the next. I see it in myself. Like I can listen to a 3-hour podcast and I can't do anything else for 3 hours. I can't even watch movies anymore.
Yeah.
Like I find myself too distracted by other things.
Are you doing something else while you listen to the podcast, or are you just sitting there listening to it?
Driving often,
Yeah.
which is another great thing left over from other time where you have to focus. I'm really dreading when cars drive themselves because
Right.
we'll be on our screens even then.
Right.
So I love the focus of driving, and it gets you in that meditative state and you can listen
Yeah.
and receive something like this. And then often as I'm going to sleep. So that's, I like that there's not the need to get to the end. There's not a structured narrative in a podcast. So if you enjoy somebody's way of seeing the world and engaging with their guests or talking about things, I often wake up in the middle of the night and I have to find something that's just engaging enough that I'm not pissed off to be awake and boring enough that I can fall asleep to it. So if it keeps me up for an hour or two, I'm super happy because I just
Right.
learned all this stuff. And
Right.
if it's like, if it lulls me back to sleep, also wonderful.
So what are your favorite podcasts? What's on your
Well,
short
yours,
list? That's the boring one.
no, yours and Lex Friedman, I really enjoy.
Oh yeah, he's an interesting guy. He's an interesting way of looking at the world.
I like his kind of night. It's probably a lot of it is maybe a little bit more studied than it seems, but he's got this great open naivete
Yeah.
and ability to just, it's really interesting to listen to the same guest on his podcast and somebody else's.
Right.
And I remember there was one really, smart, computer scientist. And I listened to it on the Santa Fe Institute podcast, and it was incomprehensible. And it was just the podcast that was just showing off the whole time about how he was just as smart as his guest. And they were just talking, to impress each other. And what I like about Lex is he's really just wanting to coax the information out from a perspective of somebody who's open to what that person has to say and wanting to ask absurdly general questions and basic questions
Right.
and not showing off at all. And
But he's like a particle physicist or something.
no, I think he's an AI. I think he's an AI researcher. He's an expert in machine learning, and he's his side. The podcast is his side gig that's become accidentally a central gig. I think because I started listening when
But
he
he's
only
like
had a few thousand
really
listeners.
smart in a mathematical
in AI. It
tech
used to be
way.
called, for the first 50 episodes, it was called the Artificial Intelligence Podcast.
Oh, okay.
And then he started getting a broader and broader audience. I think much to his and everyone's surprise. So
He was
then
on
changed
Rogan
that.
a lot.
Yeah.
Rogan really likes him and supports him.
There is
which
this thing
cool.
about men liking the sound of their own voice. That's why I asked this question a little bit. I do think a lot of podcasters do. It's not a coincidence that we're men, but maybe you're right. It's a kind of asserting that the beauty of that, you know, role of masculinity, and we can be aware of it without being ashamed of it. But you know, I saw a tweet once that said that Joe Rogan supposedly can like suck his own cock, and then someone tweeted underneath, "Isn't that what podcasting is?" Like, it's like you're like not happy to hear this.
I wish I could suck my own cock. Would have saved me lots of money over the years. Yeah, I
I
don't
thought
know.
you didn't
I don't
spend
think
money for
that's
sex.
fair. I will defend Joe. I know he gets all sorts of shit, and you know he's down in Texas now and all that. But I know him pretty well, and I could tell story after story about how generous and decent he
And
is when he
genuinely
doesn't need to
curious
be.
too.
Yeah, and totally upfront about what he doesn't know, and you know.
I do think that I hope at its best, podcasting is a type of curiosity and engagement with ideas
Yeah.
and with humans in a long format that is not structured, and it's beautiful for that very
And it's not
reason.
exclusive. I mean, you know, you're talking about how most podcasters are men, and okay, but if any women want a podcast, there's no barrier to entry.
Yeah,
It's
this is
super
true.
easy, right? So it's not like it's a men's club and no girls allowed. Anybody can podcast. It's
Yeah, but I'm reminded of the, you know, Bobby Fischer was famously misogynistic, and he used the fact that women weren't playing chess as well as men to like as proof of their inferiority. And my former uncle-in-law, Alexander Coburn, one of his very first book was a kind of Freudian analysis of chess. And he said what Bobby Fischer missed was that women lack the neurosis to make them interested in wanting to play this stupid game, which he saw as a form of masturbation. Like you're playing with these wooden pieces, and he saw it as like sublimated or ritualized patricide.
Right.
You're just having to kill your father over and over again.
Right.
And when I was a kid, like I dreamt that I killed my father when I was 13, and I told him I was really freaked out that I'd had this really scary dream of like violently killing him. And he said, "That's wonderful. Every boy must kill his father." He was like steeped in Freud at the time,
funny.
you know, in the 80s, 70s. And
Congratulations.
yeah, he thought it was wonderful. And the idea that people who get stuck with chess is because they're not able to move past that adolescent dream, and they're just having to kill the father over and over again. I thought it was pretty interesting.
I don't know
take
how
on
it
the
applies
game.
to podcasting though, because women know how to talk. You know.
Yeah, but maybe they don't think that the sound of their own voice droning on for hours is something valuable worth doing.
I could introduce you to some women. Yeah, I don't know. I think podcasting. I think you're right though. It's using technology against itself in a really beautiful way. It's you know one of the most gratifying things that happens in my life is the sense of community around my podcast.
Yeah.
When you know we go to fucking Provo, Utah or something and say we're going to be at this beer hall for you know on Tuesday for 2 hours and 40 people show up and they're all weirdos. They're all like, there's a type, you know, that's drawn to this community. And so when they meet each other, you can just see like, wow, they really get along. And these are people who don't have a lot of friends because they're weirdos, you know? Yeah, Anya, after we went to, I don't know, we did 4 or 5 of these and she was like, you know, there's a particular kind of guy. There's a type who listens to your podcast. I was like, really? She's like, yeah, it's a guy in a masculine world who's got a real like sensitive feminine side that he's not repressing. So it's like a fireman who's sweet and kind, or like a fucking guy who cuts the lumberjack, you know, who you know loves sewing or something. There's this particular kind of guy. And the more, you know, since then I just noticed over and over, yeah, like that, those are my peeps as far as the guys go. That's cool.
I love that. Yeah.
And a lot of the people in my life, the closest people in my life came through the podcast. It's such a great way to, you know, bring people into your life.
No, I often meet people who recognize my name from your podcast, and that's always really wonderfully surprising.
really?
Like, oh, I've heard you on Chris Ryan. And
Yeah.
anyway, so for those listening on my podcast, because I think we're going to co-release this, Chris Ryan's podcast is Tangentially Speaking, and it is definitely amongst my favorite
Oh, right. We were
podcasts.
going down your list. Who else? Do you ever listen to Smartless? You ever heard of that?
No.
It's interesting, and it's something that I kind of miss in my podcast because it's just me and the guest. It's three actors: Will Arnett, you know him from Arrested Development and 30 Rock. He was in all these things. Sean, I forget his name. He was in Will and Grace. He's gay. He played a gay character on the show, and Jason Bateman. And the three of them are really good friends, and they do it by Zoom. They started it during COVID, and you know they've known each other for a decade or more, so giving each other shit, and it's that community kind of thing. And they'll have a surprise guest every week. It's a surprise guest, so they don't have a chance to prepare. So it's just like, you know, Ethan Hawke or you know, anyone, Sean Penn, you know, like all these really interesting people come on. And it's this spontaneous conversation between the four of them. And it's really cool because you get to see these, you know, it's like sitting in on a conversation where four actors, well-known actors, go to dinner together and they're talking to each other. They're not speaking to a journalist. You know what I mean? I really like that podcast. And they did one. The reason I started listening, a friend sent me a link to one with Michael Lewis, who wrote Liar's Poker and The Big Short and all that. Great writer. And at the end of it, like the last 20 minutes, they talked about his daughter who had died in a traffic accident last year. And it was really fucking moving, like talking about, you know, incredible grief when your 17-year-old daughter is suddenly gone.
Fuck.
And how people react to that around you and try to help you, but they're making it worse. And he told the story about how one friend really did help him, and I can't even tell the story without like breaking down. So I just recommend people go listen to it if they want. But it's interesting because it's these guys, and it's like, yeah, they're giving each other shit, but there's this real sensitive love underneath it all that comes out sometimes in surprising ways.
Do you also listen to these things while driving?
Yeah, not that much, honestly, because in the van we normally have the windows down because it's warm and it's too loud. So to play something, even music, has to be blasting to really hear it, and that's annoying. So Anya and I either just talk or just zone out normally when we're driving, which is really nice.
So when do you listen?
Flights, on walks.
Yeah.
You know, I like to go for,
Same.
when I'm stable, I like to go for a good, you know, long walk every day, at least once. So it's good to listen then. Yeah, I'm not sure when I listen. That's a good question because I do listen pretty regularly, but yeah.
Speaking of walks, I think we should maybe try and go on one before we lose this beautiful light.
Yeah.
Are you interested in
Sounds
a little
good.
walk?
Definitely.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else that we want
Tal
to
Ruspoli,
touch on?
Being in the World podcast. You'll probably release yours before I've got 5 or 6 in the pipeline. I don't know how many you've got.
No, just Anya.
Just
I release them pretty quick usually.
Yeah.
I don't do intros or anything like that, so I just
so
put them
it's
out there
just
the way they are.
push the buttons.
Yeah.
Yeah. This I don't know how many times have you been on my podcast. This must be
3
6
or 4.
Oh, really?
Really? Yeah, I think just 3, maybe 4.
I don't know. I remember one you played flamenco guitar at the beginning. I think we recorded in your camper up in
Yeah, that was
Vancouver.
like one of your very first podcasts.
How long have we known each other now?
It's been 10 years now.
Has it been 10
Yeah,
years?
yeah.
Fuck, man.
Yeah, it's a great intersection of nomadism and intersection of like our lives that happens. We managed to do it a couple times a year at least, it seems,
We
and
run into each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
by accident and design mixed together. Mostly design.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's good to see you. Good to chat with you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.